Food security. What is food security? Food security is defined as the availability of food and one access to it. A household is considered food secure when its occupants do not live in hunger or fear of starvation. Stages of food insecurity ranges from food secure situations to full-scale famine. The World Food Summit of 1996 defined food security as existing when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. Kumbaga, umiiral daw ito sa pagkakaroon ng sapat at nakakayahan na matugunan ng isang pamilya yung pangangailangan ng bawat isa. Also, ito rin yung mga tao na may kakayahan pang-ekonomiya na magkaroon ng maayos at masustansyang pagkain na masustain yung needs nila na magkaroon ng active and healthy life. This definition introduces four main dimensions of food security: the physical availability of food, economic physical access to food, food utilization, and stability of other three dimensions of overtime. So, yun, yung tandaan natin yung apat: availability, access, utilization, and stability. Availability. The first World Food Conference in 1974 focused on the problem of global production, trade, and stocks. Hence, the original food security debate focused on adequate supply of food and ensuring stability of these supplies through food reserves. Food ability addressed the supply side of food security and is determined by the level of food production, stock levels, and net trade. The four dimension of food security is one way to understand these four dimensions of the broad food security concept is to examine how the meaning and common understanding of food security was evolved over time. In modern times, the interest in food security was regenerated following the world food crisis of 1972 to 1974. The crisis originated from a combination of factors including adverse conditions in several parts of the world which reduced global grain supplies. Subsequently, a dramatic increase in demand of grain imports doubled international grain price, which threatened the food security status of food importing nation. As a result, the First World Food Conference, held in 1974, focused on the problem of global production, trade, and stocks, and the original food security debate focused on adequate supply of food and ensuring stability of these supplies through food reserves rather. Subsequently, food security efforts focus primarily on food production and storage mechanism to offset fluctuations in global supply and ensure the ability of import food when needed. Next. The second, access. From the early 1980s, the importance of food access was increasingly recognized as a key determinant of food security. Food production is just one several means that people have to acquire the food that they need. Economic and physical access to food is an adequate supply of food at the national or international level does not in itself guarantee household level food security. However, it became obvious that adequate supply of food at the national or international level does not in itself guarantee household level food security. For example, the Green Revolution in Asia of the 1960s and 1970s, with its package of improved seeds, farm technology, better irrigation, and chemical fertilization, was highly successful at augmenting food supplies, but this was not automatically translated into improvements in food security of all people. A dramatic increase in demand for grain imports doubled international grain price, which threatened the food security status of food importing nations. This insight highlight the problem of lack of effective demand. Other means of Other means to access food. Food can be accessed through trade, barter, collection of wild foods, and community supports network. It can also be received as a gift or even though theft. Remember that access to food is influenced by market factors and the price of food as well as individuals' purchasing power, which is related to employment and livelihood opportunities. Third dimension is food utilization has become increasingly prominent in food security discussions since the 1990s. Utilization is commonly understood as the way the body makes the most various nutrients in the food. This food security dimension is determined primarily by people health status, general hygiene and sanitation, water quality, healthcare practices, and food safety and quality are determinants of food utilization by the body. Sufficient energy and nutrients intake by individuals is the result of good care and feeding practices, food preparation, diversity of the diet, and intra-household distribution of food. Combined with good biological utilization of food consumed, this determine the nutritional status of individuals. Food security was traditionally perceived as consuming sufficient protein and energy. Food quantity, the importance of micronutrients for balanced and nutritious diet. Food quality is now well appreciated. Stability, the praise all people at all times is integral to the definition of food security and is key to achieving national food security objective. All people define different people are food secure to varying degrees and will be affected adverse different directly. We must access variations in food security status between different groups of people. Most commonly, humanitarian and development agencies differentiate between groups according to their main livelihood, source of food, or source of income, in addition to other factors such as geographical location and wealth. And all times means this recognize that people's food security situation may change. Even if your food intake is adequate today, you are still considered to be food insecure if you have inadequate access to food on a periodic basis, risking a deterioration of your nutritional status, adverse weather conditions, political stability, or economic factors, yung unemployed, rising food price, may impact on your food security status.
Food security major challenges. Production. Slow rate of growth of food production is adversely affecting the supply of food gains. Dito po sa production, sa pagbaba po ng paggawa ng mga produkto, naapektuhan po nito yung supply ng pagkain. Halimbawa po nito yung kokonti po yung nagtanim ng palay, edi kokonti rin po yung bigas na maisusupply nila para sa atin. Consumption. Increasing consumption and wastages are putting pressures on food grain stocks. Dito naman po sa consumption, sa pagtaas po ng pagkonsumo at pagtatapon natin ng mga pagkain, nagkakaroon po ng kakulangan at nape-pressure po yung mga stocks natin na ilabas nila yon o mawalan tayo ng stocks. Distribution. Bottleneck pose threats to its availability even in normal times. Dito naman po sa distribution, nahihirapan tayo mag-distribute ng mga products natin at minsan nadidelay tayo sa pag-distribute nito. Politics. Political issues also affecting food chains. Dito naman po sa politics, sila po ang nagre-regulate at nagpapatupad ng mga presyo ng mga produkto at pagkain, kaya po nakaka-apekto sila sa food chains natin. Food security country responses. Food stability refers to the ability to obtain food over time. Dito po sa food stability, stable po yung food natin or nakakuha tayo ng mga pagkain kahit lumipas yung mga panahon. Food access refers to the affordability and allocation of food as well as the preference of individual and households. Dito po sa food access, yung pong mga tao, meron po silang access na makakuha ng mga pagkain o kaya po nilang bilhin or ma-afford yung mga pagkain na yun. Food availability relates to the supply of food through production, distribution, and exchange. Dito po sa food availability, dito po pumapasok yung paggawa natin ng mga produkto, yung pagdidistribute natin ng mga produkto, at pakipagbalitan natin ng mga produkto sa ibang bansa para makakuha ng supply. Things affecting food security today include global water crisis. Water table reserves are falling in many countries including northern China, the US, and India due to widespread overpumping and irrigation. Climate change. Rising global temperatures are beginning to have a ripple effect on crop yields, forest resources, water supplies, and altering the balance of nature. Nakakaapekto po yung global water crisis sa food security kasi po naubusan po tayo ng water supply dahil sa mga overpumping and irrigation at yung pong tubig, ito po yung pangunahin nating kailangan. Sa climate change, nakakaapekto po ito sa food security natin dahil po sa pagtaas at pagbaba ng temperatura, nahihirapan pong tumubo ang mga halaman at naubusan rin po tayo ng water supply at nagiging unbalanced po yung nature natin. Other things affecting food security today are land degradation and greedy land deals. Land degradation, intensive farming leads to a vicious cycle of exhaustion of soil fertility and decline of agricultural yields. Greedy land deals, corporation and governments buying rights to millions of acres of agricultural land in developing countries to secure their own long-term food supplies. Dito naman po sa land degradation, yung pong intensive farming natin, yung pong lupa, bumababa po yung kalidad niya para mapagtamnan ulit or hindi na po siya gumagana or hindi na tumutubo yung mga halaman dito. Yung greedy land deals naman po, dito naman po, yung pagbili po ng mga government or mga corporation para pagtayuan ng mga buildings, kagaya po nung ni Cynthia Villar, yung pong paggawa niya ng mga subdivisions, yun po yung halimbawa nitong greedy land deals.
Importance of global food security. Growth in the agriculture sector has been found, on average, to be at least twice as effective in reducing poverty as growth in other sectors. Food insecurity, often rooted in poverty, decreases the ability of countries to develop their agricultural markets and economies. Access to quality, nutritious food is fundamental to human existence. Secure access to food can produce wide-ranging positive impacts, including, first, economic growth and job creation. Where economic growth is good for job creation, creating more and better quality jobs is key to boosting growth, reducing poverty, and increasing social cohesion. The second one is poverty reduction, poverty relief, or poverty alleviation, which is intended to permanently lift people out of poverty. The third one is trade opportunities, or we should say bilateral trade, where basically economic concept involving the buying and selling of goods and services. The next one is increased global security and stability. And the last one is improve health and healthcare. Then let's proceed to 5 main tenets of the concept of food security. But basically, the food security was originally defined as TRIO in mid-1990s. It is composed of quality, quantity, and safety only. However, since then, the concept of cultural acceptability has worked its way into the food security nexus, when considering the progression of globalization and the environmental impacts of the modern lifestyle on the planet. In addition to the conscious decision concerning caloric intake that this project further, they address the variables of nutritional content and palatability. They reduce concerns over toxic contaminants and cater to the cultural proclivities of those who seek to express culinary consciousness through the food they eat. For the following discussion, the concept of food security is the one defined by the International Food Policy Research Institute, which now covers the following quantity, which is energy, quality, provision of all essential nutrients, safety, free from toxic factors and contaminants, palatability, taste, textures, and so on, cultural acceptability nationally in local markets, and eventually at the household level.
So the next topic will be the duration and severity of food insecurity. What is the nature of food insecurity? We will be able to know that through the duration and severity of food insecurity. There are important differences in how the duration and severity of food insecurity impact on people's lives. First is the duration of food insecurity. Inadequate food consumptions may vary from a short-term experience to a lifelong condition. So basically, duration means the amount of time. So there are two general types of food insecurity. The first one is the chronic food insecurity, which is the long-term or persistent. Then the other one is the transitory food insecurity, which is the short-term and temporary. Chronic food insecurity. So, kailan ba siya nag-occur? Um, it occurs when people are unable to meet their maximum food requirements over a sustained period of time or over a long period of time. And it is often the result of extended poverty, lack of assets, and inadequate, or in other term, insufficient access to productive or financial resources. Then next one is the transitory food insecurity, which occurs kapag merong sa sudden drop or fluctuation sa ability to purchase or grow enough food to meet the physiological needs for good health and activity. And transitory food insecurity is relatively unpredictable and can suddenly emerge. Uh, an intermediate type of food insecurity, which is the seasonal food insecurity. It occurs when there is a cyclical pattern of inadequate availability to and access to food. This is associated with seasonal fluctuations in the climate, cropping patterns, work opportunities, and or prevalence of diseases. So, base na din sa name niya, it is seasonal. So the concept of seasonal food security falls between chronic and transitory food insecurity. It is similar to chronic food insecurity in a way that it is usually predictable and it follows a sequence of known events. And it can be linked to the transitory food insecurity because it has a limited duration and it can also be seen as recurrent or repeatedly occurring. So next is the severity of food insecurity. The measurement, the measure of severity of food insecurity will influence the nature, extent, and urgency of assistance needed by affected population groups. So food security analysts, professionals may use the term acute food security insecurity to describe a severe and life-threatening situations. The most extreme situations usually associated with substantial loss of death of life and will warrant the description of famine. Famine means extreme scarcity of from food resources kaya siya nagkakos ng loss of life or death. And the intensity of food insecurity may be measured in terms of levels of food intake. One option is to relate the severity of food insecurity to how consumption falls below a threshold of 2,100 kilocalories per day. So, yung 2,100 kilocalories per day, yun yung reference niya para masabi na uh, food secure yung isang community or yung tao. And then, food security status, yung indicators dito is the energy intake or yung kilocalories ka. And there are four food security status. First one is the food secure, na sabi ko nga kanina, kapag nami-meet yung food intake na uh, 2,100 kilocalories per day. And mild food insecurity, moderate food insecurity. And then kapag sobrang baba na nung energy intake or yung food intake, uh, doon na nagkakaroon ng food insecurity. And based on the Food and Agriculture Organization, the measure for hunger is defined as undernourishment and refers to the portion of the population whose dietary energy consumption is less than the predetermined threshold. So, kapag less na nga yung less than 2,100 kilocalories per day, uh, it means na yung proportion of population na yun or yung tao is undernourished. Here's another example of an integrated food security and humanitarian phase classification framework. Uh, this framework provides a classification system for food security and humanitarian crisis based on a range of livelihood needs. So there is the phase of classification. First is the generally food secure, which means that uh, the food resource is enough. And then the second one is chronically food insecure, which means that the food insecurity is recurring or repeatedly occurring. The next one is the acute food livelihood crisis, which means that na nagkakaroon na ng critical lack of food resources. And next is the humanitarian emergency, which means that there is a critical threat for health, safety, security, and well-being of a community. The next is the famine or Hungarian catastrophe, which means that there is an extreme scarcity of food resources. And for indicators, the first one is the crude mortality rate, which is the number of death that is occurring within the year. Then the second one is the malnutrition prevalence or the rate of how common malnutrition is. Then next one is the food access or availability. The next one is the dietary diversity or the number of different food groups which is consumed over a reference period. And then next is the water access or availability. The next one is coping strategies or the specific efforts that is taken to cope up from food insecurity. Then next one is, or lastly, is the livelihood assets, which is the resources that are available for the local people.
This presentation will introduce the concept of vulnerability. It will also introduce other concepts that relate to or depict human well-being in one way or another, including hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. Hunger is usually understood as an uncomfortable or painful sensation caused by insufficient food energy consumption. Scientifically, hunger is referred to as food deprivation. So, hunger, alam naman natin yung meaning, di ba, pagkagutom. So, ibig sabihin, hindi enough yung kinain natin kanina or kagabi, or possible naman na hindi talaga tayo kumain. Malnutrition, it results from deficiencies, excesses, or imbalance in the consumption of macro and micronutrients. So, malnutrition, ibig sabihin hindi enough yung nutrients na natitake natin galing sa pagkain na kinakain natin. Pwedeng undernutrition or overnutrition. Mostly, yung mga apektado dito is makikita natin sa mga bata. Siyempre, makikita natin yung katawan nila sobrang papayat na. Poverty. Poverty encompasses different dimensions of deprivation that relate to human capabilities, including consumption and food security, health, education, rights, voice, security, dignity, and decent work. So, poverty, alam din naman natin ang meaning, kahirapan. So, syempre, kapag may poverty, nandyan din ang food insecurity, hunger, saka malnutrition. So, kapag may food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition, syempre, nandyan din yung manghihina yung mga katawan natin. Meron din siya na parang hindi natin makikita yung growth and yung development ng isang tao. So, ayun nga, manghihina tayo. Syempre, kapag manghihina tayo, wala tayong magagawa na kahit anong activities, kahit sa bahay man yan o sa labas. That's possible din na mabilis tayong dapuan ng sakit. Tapos yung sa growth and development naman, syempre wala tayong makikita kasi nga, mabilis tayong dapuan ng sakit. Lalo ngayon, may mga viruses na kumakalat. Tapos, hindi tayo makakagawa ng mga physical activities. What is vulnerability? It is defined in terms of the following three critical dimensions. Number 1, vulnerability to an outcome. So, syempre, may mga bagay talaga na mahihina yung kinalalabasan ng ginawa natin. Halimbawa na lang sa pagtatanim. Nagtanim ka ngayon, tapos, syempre, hindi mo din naman din alam kung ilan yung magiging bunga ng itinanim mo. Number 2, from a variety of risk factors. So, syempre, may mga bagay talaga na hindi natin inaasahan na dadating. Katulad na lang ng bagyo. Siyempre, nitong mga nakaraan, alam naman natin na maraming lugar yung na-wash out talaga. So, halimbawa na lang din sa itinanim natin, siyempre, yung bagyo pala sa lugar natin tatama. Hindi natin naasahan yung itinanim natin. Sobra pala yung kalamidad na yun. Sobra pala yung magiging epekto nun. So, number 3, because of an inability to manage those risks. So, ayun nga, syempre, hindi naman din natin makakontrol yung kalamidad na dumating sa lugar natin. So, yung itinanim natin, syempre, wala na tayong magagawa doon. Hindi na natin alam kung paano pa i-manage yun. Kasi, syempre, unahin din natin yung sarili natin para makaligtas, para maka-evacuate. People vulnerable to food insecurity are those who are able to maintain an acceptable level of food security today, but may be at risk of becoming food insecure in future. So, vulnerable to food insecurity, parang, halimbawa ikaw, kasi alam natin na ngayong panahon na to, parang may mga supply pa ng pagkain na dumadating sa atin. Parang syempre marami pa tayong nagagawang paraan para makapaghanap ng pambili ng kakainin natin sa araw-araw. Meron din naman na nagsusupply din talaga sa atin. Pero syempre, hindi naman habang buhay na meron tayong may pang bibili ng pagkain, ganun. So, papasok dito yung food insecure na parang, halimbawa, ikaw magulang ka. Tapos, syempre, uunahin mo kapakanan ng anak mo. So, imbis na yung pagkain na dapat kakainin mo na lang, ibibigay mo sa kanila. Vulnerability analysis helps to design better food security responses. So, yung vulnerability analysis, sila yung tumutulong para parang masiguro yung food security ng mga tao. It has implication for both emergency programming and for long-term food security policy. So, para sa akin, parang emergency programming siguro dito yung halimbawa may kalamidad na pumapasok. Siyempre, isa din sila sa mga tumutulong para yung supply ng pagkain dun sa mga taong apektado is maibibigay talaga. VA allows for more precisely targeted response than a simple estimation of the aggregate food gap. So, yung vulnerability analysis, parang sila tinitiyak nila kung tinitiyak nila yung food gap ng bawat tao kaysa yung sa ina-estimate lang yung pag-estimate na ganito yung food gap ng ibang tao. Para sa kanila siguro, masiguro nila. VA is important in influencing the design of developmental intervention that precede or follow Asia. So, yung VA is importante siyang maka-influensya sa pagde-develop ng isang bagay ng parang mas lalong madaling panahon bago pa may mangyaring hazard. Okay. Understanding the dynamic nature of food security opens up new intervention opportunities. So, yung nature of food security is nag-open siya sa panibagong actions na pwedeng gawin ng mga tao para halimbawa may mga dumating na hazard or natural disaster sa kanila. If interventions are designed in ways that increase resilience, then the very need for a humanitarian intervention when a hazard occurs will diminish. So, kung may mga action na nagawa, syempre, parang malilesen na nito yung epekto ng hazard sa kanila. VA suggests two main intervention options, either to reduce the degree of exposure to the hazard or to increase the ability to cope. So, to reduce the degree of exposure to hazard, parang may mga action na silang gagawin para pag dumating man yung hazard, malilesen na yung epekto nito sa kanila. Tapos, to increase the ability to cope, dito naman ay para kung halimbawa man na, yun nga, maapektuhan na sila ng hazard na yun, is alam na nila kung ano yung gagawin.
It's important to understand how these concepts are related to food insecurity. To what extent do they overlap? In what way do they differ? Let's now focus on the concept of hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. Understanding how these concepts are related to food insecurity can highlight how achieving food security can contribute to other goals such as the reduction of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. Moreover, understanding this linkage can clarify how a poverty reduction program and fighting malnutrition can contribute to building food security. What is food insecurity? Food insecurity is lack of consistent access to enough food sa isang lugar o isang bansa. Nagkukulang ng source ng pagkain. Kaya, pumapasok dito yung hunger. What is hunger? Hunger is usually understood as an uncomfortable or painful sensation caused by insufficient food energy consumption. Scientifically, hunger is referred to as food deprivation. How does hunger differ from food insecurity? Hunger is personal, physical sensation of discomfort, while food insecurity, lack of available financial resources for food at the household level. Dahil kulang financial sa isang household, nandun na nakakaranas sila ng hunger, lalo na nung pandemic. Maraming mamamayan na nawala ng trabaho, kaya kumapos sila sa financial nila para i-provide yung pangangailangan ng pang-araw-araw nila, yung kinakain. Nandun na nakakaranas sila ng 2 beses lang kumain sa isang araw. isang beses lang kumakain sa isang araw. Yun yung tinatawag na food deprivation. Hindi sila nakakain ng sakto sa isang araw. Na dapat ay 3 beses sa isang araw. Hindi na provide nila yung pangangailangan na pagkain. Kaya nangyayari yun sa kanila. Kaya maraming Pilipino ang nakakaranas ng gutom. Almost 20.9% estimated na Filipino ang nakakaranas ng gutom. At ito ay tumaas nung pumasok tong COVID-19. Tumaas ang rate ng nagugutom na Pilipino dahil doon sa naranasan nating pandemic hanggang ngayon. At dahil sa kakulangan ng pagkain, nandun na pumapasok na yung malnutrition. What is malnutrition? It results from deficiency, excess or imbalance in the consumption of macronutrients and micronutrients. Ang macronutrients ay kaloob nun ay carbohydrates, fat, protein. Ito ay nakukuha sa karne, sa kanin, etc. At ang micronutrients, ito ay nakukuha dun sa mga gulay. At dahil sa kakulangan ng financial, hindi yun na-provide at yung mga pagkain na yun na para pagkukuhanan ng nutrients na yun. Kaya nangyayari na may malnutrition. Ang malnutrition ay may under siya na 3. Undernutrition, micronutrient, at overweight. Ang undernutrition may 3 part siya. Wasting, stunting, underweight. Wasting is low weight for height. Stunting is low height for age. Underweight, low weight for age. Ang micronutrient naman ay kulang sa vitamin na tinitake. Ito yung, kung napanood nyo yung sa Jessica Soho na 3 bata na matataba, makikita nating malulusog sila. Pero under sila sa malnutrition. Bakit? Kasi kulang yung na-provide ng parents sila na nutrients dun sa kinakain nila. Kaya under sila. At yung height nila hindi tugma dun sa katimbang nila. At ang overweight naman, ito yung hindi yung maraming kinakain, kaya ang taba-taba, hindi. Ito ay yung non-communicable disease. Isang disease ang underweight. At ang pamahalaan natin ay gumawa ng programa para dito sa malnutrition na to, para mabawasan yung bilang. At ito yung may feeding sa school. Halos nangyayari to sa elementary. Kasi every day, may estimated na 95 Filipinos ang namamatay. At ang mataas na rate ay sa mga bata dahil sa kakulangan ng nutrients para labanan yung sakit na dumadapo sa ating katawan. Maraming namamatay dahil sa kakulangan ng nutrients. Kaya para maiwasan to, gumawa yung pamahalaan natin ng programa. At yun ay yung i-provide yung hindi na provide ng parents na pagkain na nutrients, na may nutrients. Kaya may feedings na nangyayari. At the relation between malnutrition and food insecurity can be visualized as overlapping domain. Malnutrition at food insecure. Ang malnutrition at food insecure ay may kapareho sila. There is a large degree of convergence where people may be both food insecure and malnourished. At sa under ng malnourished, may malnourished due to non-food reasons. Some Filipino may be malnourished or non-food reasons, for instance, due to poor health and caring practice. Tapos ang sa food insecure, may under siya, temporary food insecurity. Temporary food insecurity. Among the food insecure are those who are temporarily food insecure and hungry. But this has not yet manifested itself as malnutrition. At ang pangalawa ay at risk of future food insecurity. Finally, the category of food insecure also includes those at risk of future food insecurity, but those are not category hungry, categ- uh, currently hungry or malnourished.
What is poverty? According to the OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, poverty encompasses different dimensions of deprivation that relate to human capabilities including consumption and food security, health, education, rights, voice, security, dignity, and decent work. When we say poverty, ito yung limited lang yung kakayahan ng isang tao o kaya sabihin na natin na wala talagang kakayahan na makapag-purchase o maka-avail ng mga pangangailangan sa araw-araw. Food insecurity and poverty are deeply interrelated phenomena. As with the concept of food security, there has been an evolution in the way that poverty is generally understood. Any attempt to define, measure, or combat them requires that the relationship between them should be explicitly taken into account. Although poverty has many dimensions, at an operational level, it is most often defined in terms of income. We all know na kapag wala kang income, walang pumapasok na pera, wala kang maiilabas, makakaranas ka ng paghihirap. The most common measures of poverty are national income poverty lines and individual income of less than $1 per day. Ang katumbas ng $1 per day sa Philippine peso ay 48.17 pesos. Ang national income poverty lines naman ay usually based on the cost of purchasing a food to satisfy the requirement for a healthy existence and adding an allowance for non-food expenditure. The relationship between food insecurity and poverty is quite complex and can be seen as a vicious cycle. First is poverty. While poverty is undoubtedly the cause of hunger, papasok na dyan yung food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition. Then, susunod na yung poor physical and cognitive development, which diminish ability of the person to learn, work, and care for themselves and their family members. That's why magkakaroon ng low productivity that yung mga tao hindi makakapagtayo ng mga kailangan, yung mga assets na makakapagpa-exit sa kanila sa kahirapan. It is argued that a strategy for attacking poverty in conjunction with policies to ensure food security offers the best hope of swiftly reducing mass poverty and hunger. This provides the justification for maintaining the focus on hunger reduction and food security in strategies and policies. Specific action to fight hunger and malnutrition are needed in conjunction with other anti-poverty measures to most effectively tackle both. It is interesting to note that the first Millennium Development Goal is not simply about reducing poverty, it also maintains a distinct focus on reducing hunger. The first Millennium Development Goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. The first target is the people whose income is less than $1 a day or 48.17 pesos. And the second target is the people who suffer from hunger. Sustainable poverty reduction is an essential precondition for reduction in hunger and malnutrition. But income growth, even if sustainable and equitable, is not sufficient to achieve food security without complementary public intervention. The most important factor in explaining reductions in malnutrition was the growth in per capita income. However, this factor alone could explain roughly half the reduction in child malnutrition over this period. The remainder was explained by improvements in health, clean water, sanitation, and education. Economic growth alone won't take care of the problem of food security. What is needed is a combination of income growth supported by direct nutrition interventions and investments in health, water, and education.